you had to manage the nation's finances during a global financial crisis. Rishi Sunak has to deliver a budget during a global pandemic. How do you write a budget in unstable times?
Well, I guess that what he'll do on Wednesday is really give a statement of work in progress. I agree with, I've just got the tail end of what Paul Johnson was saying there, and I agree with exactly what he was saying. I think this is an opportunity for the Chancellor to set out how he sees things developing over the next year or so. In 2008, I was faced with a situation where we had a complete meltdown of the financial system. As you know, the RBS, then the world's largest bank, came within 3 hours of total collapse, and it brought down other banks with it had that happened. But the difference then is we were able to start reflating the economy to get it to recover immediately, whereas for the last year, the government, for the understandable reasons, has been suppressing economic activity to try and get control of this virus. So I think, I look to this Wednesday to see a sense of direction. And also, I hope, at long last, to take the opportunity of saying there are some big things we need to sort out, like social care, like ending this nonsense of people who are not really self-employed, being treated as self-employed, who've got no financial resilience, and building up resilience of our public service as well. So I think I see this as work in progress rather than some sort of defining moment.
There are a number of support schemes in place for businesses and workers. What's your view on when it's safe to start withdrawing them?
When it's clear that the economy is actually recovering. Remember, last year, the government made the mistake of being wildly optimistic about the control of the virus. We were told we were going back to work. There was Eat Out to help out, and we were faced with a sudden shutdown when the virus got out of control in the autumn, running up to Christmas. I think it's essential that the furlough scheme continues until it is clear that the economy is starting to recover and starting to grow. Otherwise, you will get a lot of people who will be out of work without adequate financial support and causing real hardship. Similarly, universal credit was lifted at the beginning of the pandemic. That has got to continue. Because otherwise you will see people, some of whom are already in suffering severe financial hardship, having to suffer even more. What we must avoid at all costs is what happened in the 1980s, where people lost their jobs, had no real financial support. There was very little open to them to go into alternative work or retraining or whatever. And as a result, a whole generation of people were simply written off and never really got back into the labour market. So we need to, we're not at the end of this yet. Hopefully the virus, the injections and the virus will be suppressed, but we are nowhere near the end of it yet. And it would be far, far too early to call victory at this stage. We've got to keep on. We've done a lot so far, but we've got to see this through.
A debate is taking place in both parties about when you start to pay off the debt, when you start raising taxes. What's your view?
Well, my view is, this is rather like, wartime analogies can be overdone. But, at the end of the Second World War, we had a huge amount of debt for understandable reasons. My view is that we have to stay that course. I would not want to be taking money out of the economy just now. I think when the Tory Liberal coalition government took office in 2010, they made a big mistake in assuming that it was okay to start cutting into the things, that's what's now known as austerity, which meant that we never really got a sustained recovery. The economy bumped along for about 8 or 9 years before, of course, the pandemic then hit. So I think it would be a big mistake to take money out of the economy this year. Clearly, all this has got to be paid for one day. But, as Paul Johnson was telling you just a few moments ago, this is not the year to be doing it. The tax rises will come, and my guess is in the next couple of years or so. Make no mistake about that, because one of the things that helps you with your tax revenues is a growing economy. Because the more people in work, and if they're earning more, then you get more taxes coming in. So it's in our interest to make sure that we get a well-grounded and solid recovery, rather than starting to do things that could easily derail that recovery, with the result that the cost in the long term will be far greater for us.
And that was very much the line that Annalise Dodds, the shadow Chancellor, was making. There are some figures in the Labour Party, you will know them. John Trickett, Ian Lavery. One says it's grotesque to vote against corporation tax rises. John Trickett said it would be a shameful betrayal of Labour values. I mean, it's a socialist party, isn't it? They've got a point.
No, I don't think they do. Look, for the economy to work, for people to go into work, then companies need to make profits. And I'm not against corporation tax. I just happen to think that if you start increasing taxation now, when frankly the economy is stalled for understandable reasons, would be totally mad. I think we've got to have an economy that is growing, where companies are doing well, they're generating profits, and yes, they have to pay their fair share. But if you take a combination of what's going on at the moment, you've got the pandemic. It's quite clear that Brexit is having adverse effects that were blindingly obvious at the time, actually, but were denied by many who supported the whole thing, and that's impeding company growth and therefore profits. We've all got to pay our fair share. But if you choke off the recovery prematurely, as happened 10 years ago, after we left office, that would be a profound mistake. So, Annalisa Dodds is quite right about this, as is Keir Starmer, and the approach that we should be taking. We've got to get the economy growing again, and we're not out of the woods yet. We're making progress, as I said, with vaccinations, but we are by no means out of the woods yet. And there's always the risk, the tail risk of, the virus resurfacing or, a mutant strain starting to develop and so on. So having started on this course, let's see it through.
We spoke to Rishi Sunak earlier in the programme, and he said that it would be important on Wednesday to level with the public about the scale of the crisis. He didn't say that he would introduce taxes on the day, but he said it was important to level with them. Is it right to tell the public about the scale of the challenge and give people a timeline of when tax rises may be necessary?
Well, I think it's always important that people who are elected to high political office are straightforward and level with the public. You'd hope that was a statement of the blindingly obvious. I don't think anyone can be under any illusion that having borrowed this much, it's got to be repaid at some stage. And that the argument will be how you actually best achieve that. My argument is, with a growing economy, you generate more tax receipts. That will help, but it isn't going to be enough. We've got to not only repair the damage, but this pandemic has taught us we had no resilience when this hit us. We've got to make sure that there's sufficient money in the bank, as it were, so that as and when we deal with the next crisis, and there will always be something coming along, hopefully not as serious as this, but there will be other things coming along. You've got to have sufficient reserves and resilience to deal with that. Of course, and it's not easy. I know from my own experience, sometimes when you quote level with the public, it doesn't always go down well. When I said that I thought the last downturn would be more profound and more long-lasting than people met, it was not met with universal acclaim. However, I do think, yes, he's got to be straightforward about it, and it'd be astonishing if he wasn't.
And you have had to set taxes, obviously, when you were Chancellor. There's a number of taxes that are sort of being discussed at the moment. Corporation tax rises, a wealth tax, a one-off wealth tax, and of course, good old-fashioned income tax. Do you take a view on which is fairer and more likely to work and support Britain's recovery in the long run?
Well, look, in general terms, the people with the broadest shoulders should pay the most. Whether that's individuals or corporations, and that seems to me to be fairness. People want to see that everybody's paying their fair share. I mean, there are some bigger issues which if the Chancellor's in the business of levelling with us all, some big issues like the whole question of social care. That has been ducked and dodged for years now. Surely to goodness the time has come, and after all the things we've seen in care homes and so on, is to have a properly funded system of dealing with an ageing population, which is what we've got. Equally, business rates and what's happening on the high street, what's happening with changing shopping habits and so on. Frankly, I see trailed in the papers today a grant to various councils. That's all very well, but it doesn't deal with the underlying problem. So there are issues with taxation, as well as the ones that will need international cooperation, like taxing some of the big multinationals who can move their profits around at will and are paying very little tax. All these are issues where I think it would be quite useful to learn what the Treasury and the Chancellor's thinking is on these things.
It's said that this is an opportunity it's like coming out of a war. It's an opportunity to take stock and reshape Britain. Now, this government talks a lot about levelling up or building back better, but they don't talk about how we should measure those things. Should they?
Well, yes. I think, it is the case that after a pandemic like this, and a global pandemic, again, rather like, during what happened during the Second World War, even at the height of that war, there were people thinking about what the world should look like afterwards. That's where the welfare state was born, from the Beveridge report, reforms to education and so on. This is the time to start thinking about the world in which we're moving into. And that's why you do need to look at things like care. You need to look at issues like the growing number of people working in the gig economy who've got absolutely no financial resilience. They're not paying enough into the system because they can't afford to. When they come to retire, they will have inadequate pensions. So there's the whole question. We talk often enough about a green revolution, but I've yet to see anything that you can point to and say, yeah, that will make a difference. These are all issues where I do think that we need to give urgent attention to, so that we don't just limp on till we get to the next crisis. This is a big opportunity. And rather than just talk about it, and rather than say, yeah, we're going to be doing it at some point, levelling up is a great slogan, but it means absolutely nothing if you don't actually do anything. And my fear is it'll remain a slogan unless we see something that will make a real difference, particularly if you look at outside the metropolitan areas, the big cities and so on, in areas that, frankly, their economy was devastated in the 70s and 80s. If they really are going to be helped, you need a long-term 30-year commitment and a strategy that actually works, rather than simply offering to build a road here or a road there.
Working from home has become a new feature of so many of our lives. Is that bad for the economy? Should we all be encouraged to go back to commuting and support our city centres, or does working from home offer opportunities?
Well, I think there is an opportunity here. Look, firstly, people underestimate the need for human beings to meet each other and talk to each other, and I think everybody misses that. The conversation over a cup of coffee, or going out for lunch with people, or a drink after work, whatever it is. But surely there's an opportunity here. If you want, for example, towns particularly outside the big metropolitan areas to start to regenerate, people are beginning to realise, yes, you may work for a couple of days in your office, but equally you could do 2 or 3 days at work, and therefore, perhaps you can live away from London, away from the other big cities in the country, and because you're there, you're earning good money, you're spending money locally. As long as you've got decent housing and as long as you've got a decent health service, you're living in areas that's a good place to live. It's actually a good way of distributing jobs, therefore distributing wealth, therefore doing precisely what everybody wants to see, and seeing a levelling up of those areas that have been left behind. So I think there is a massive opportunity here. It won't be for everyone, and I don't think any of us want to live a life where we don't see anybody and we just stay at home. Of course, we want to talk to each other, see each other, and enjoy each other's company. But this is one way of recognising, especially in the service sector, so much does not need to be done in London. It doesn't need to be done in other city centres. It can be spread out, and all to the benefit of all of us.
And finally, Alistair Darling, Labour, you will know, has elected a new Scottish leader. How does Anna Sowell save the union?
Look, it isn't a job for one person. I think he's a good choice. He's a face of a new, dynamic, modern Scotland. He's only in his 30s. I think he's a great choice. Look, what's going on in Scotland here is it's frankly beyond belief in some ways. But firstly, you'd look at today's latest opinion poll, which shows the country split down the middle. It's 50-50. Support for independence appears to have fallen over the last week or two, and it's not surprising when you look at the feud that's now going on in the ruling party here. But the thing about Scotland's future, it will be decided in Scotland by people who live here. It won't be decided in London. It'll be decided by us living in Scotland. And there is a sizable group of people in the middle who've yet to make their mind up. And they will vote at the end of the day. But I think the majority of people at the moment say, look, in the middle of a pandemic, we don't want another referendum. We want to get on with things. I think there's a lot of people say, why not look at our poor record on health, education, industrial development, and so on. I think that it behoves all of us to ask ourselves long and hard, do you think you'll be better off? It should not be a referendum of Boris Johnson against Nicola Sturgeon or whatever it is. It should be what's best for Scotland. And I say that decision will be taken here. It won't be taken anywhere else.